Hello and welcome to Murder Dictionary Podcast. My name is Brianna and that is Courtney.
Hello. I know I say this a lot,
What
but
do you
we're on
say?
social media. We're on Murder Dictionary, or we are Murder Dictionary Podcast, across all platforms.
We're also on Murder Dictionary. You were correct.
We are that too.
That's what you're listening to right now.
That's what you're doing. Are you in our group? Come in our group. Let's talk. Let's discuss. Send us some stuff. Let's rap about it.
That sounds like something my dad would say. He said that all. Let's rap about this.
Seriously?
Yeah.
On his freestyle?
That was dadisms for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'd love to see you on our social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Definitely hit us up on there. And feel free to post and share things.
Leave us a 5-star review.
Yeah. If you enjoy the show, definitely rate, review, and subscribe. It always helps us. And tell your friends and family. If you are listening to us and know somebody that would like the show, definitely let them know. We would really appreciate that.
Don't scare them. It's kind of a niche market, I find. But yeah, if they're into it, let them in the group.
Right?
Tell them the secrets.
If you want more episodes and bonus content, you can join our Patreon. It is patreon.com/Murder Dictionary Podcast. We've got a few new people to thank that are new patrons named Dean, Jennifer, and Andrew.
Thank you.
So thanks, you guys. We really appreciate you being on there, and we hope that you enjoy the bonus episodes.
We strive to put out quality Patreon content
We're working on new bonus episodes all the time.
right now.
As we speak. So, with all that said, this is part 2 of our Jailhouse murder coverage of the New Mexico State Penitentiary riot.
It's a story for sure. This is a wild, wild ride.
Yes. Last episode, we discussed that the facility was plagued with overcrowding, corruption among the staff, and inhumane conditions. That's what we talked about on part 1. We left off where the prisoners had just jumped 4 guards doing a count in cell block E2. And E2, we learned in the episode, was where the lights were not working and there were extra inmates being housed in that dorm because of construction in their dorm.
It was chaos.
Yes, there was double the population in E2, no lights, and 4 guards were doing the cell checks at night in complete pitch black when they got jumped and taken hostage.
Crazy making conditions.
That's where we left off. So after overpowering the guards and taking them hostage, the prisoners began running through the main corridor hallway that connected the entire facility and attempting to open every door or gate possible. Like I talked about in the beginning of last episode, there was one main hallway in which if you accessed it, you had access to the entire prison because it went through every cell block, every dorm, and the main square center of the jail that had all the offices and facilities, cafeteria, gym, stuff like that.
There's a slight design flaw.
Complete failure in the design department, for sure. So after the initial hostage taking, the angry mob took additional COs hostage and spread mayhem throughout the entire prison, having access to this main hallway.
The only thing that protects you from mayhem is Allstate insurance. God, I love those commercials. Mayhem. I'm stealing
your car. They really needed
car.
Allstate here.
It's
that
so
was the
good.
problem.
That's exactly
It
what
wasn't
they
the
needed.
toilet and the food and the overcrowding. It was just Allstate.
Okay, let me just preface this. This entire prison riot is caused by fecal matter. This is a shit problem. This entire thing stems, if you really, let's go, go back, listen to episode 1. It's shit.
It's a shit riot.
Yeah, I would be pissed too if there was just crap everywhere.
Yeah,
and I've got a crap too.
One of the most egregious and inhumane things, not having working toilets, no flushing for days at a time.
Everybody's shit stinks.
When the food gives people food poisoning.
Ugh.
But on top of that, we also talked about there's no motivation to do well and not be violent because they removed the possibility of early parole and transfers or education programs. So yeah, this riot was almost bound to happen. And they ignored any sort of chatter and rumors about possible escape and hostage taking, specifically in dorm E2. So yeah, now there's mayhem because all of these things were ignored. As the prisoners were running just randomly around the hallway and trying to get into other areas, a guard named Mike Hernandez heard the crowd coming closer, and he sought refuge in dorm D1, where inmates who were just arriving were housed. This was kind of a temporary transfer unit where you first on day one were put in here, and then they found the appropriate dorm or cell block to send you to.
They're getting your blood pressure before your appointment here.
Right.
Got it. Vitals.
Once he was safely in a unit, he called the infirmary to warn them, which saved the lives of a tech named Ross Maez, as well as 7 injured inmates that were in the infirmary. Mike also located a female staff member who was able to quickly flee to safety. I mean, he saved these people's lives by taking a moment to just call a few people that were kind of on the periphery that had the opportunity to escape, right? And especially the woman who would undoubtedly be the target of a lot of violence had she not been notified.
Most definitely.
Soon after heroically informing his colleagues, Mike was discovered and taken hostage and then assaulted by the inmates. It's so sad. I can't imagine what he was feeling knowing that he had that limited amount of time before they got him. And he did the best thing he possibly could and the most work he could to notify people before he was taken. So the inmates decided to head towards that main control center. And while they did so, they placed a belt around CO Juan Bustos' neck and walked him down the main hallway naked on his hands and knees like a dog. Officer Luis DeBaca was on foot patrol outside when he realized that the inmates were almost at the main control center booth. And CO Lawrence Lucero was inside the control center alone. And the door was locked from the outside. Which seems like a crazy design flaw.
This is another, what is going on here?
Yeah, you lock, it's one person at a time inside the control booth that it controls access to the entire facility. And there's one person there that can't get out on their own. He's locked in.
Wow.
Crazy. So Lewis, knowing this, ran inside, quickly unlocked and opened the door, and the pair was actually able to run to safety outside. And it was only because of his quick thinking that that was able to happen. The inmates who were walking Juan Bustos like a dog were able to break through the glass moments after Juan and Lawrence made it outside. And like we talked about last time, it was only like weeks before then that they had replaced bars with glass, and the glass wasn't bulletproof.
I wonder if they noticed this and they're just like, file it away.
Yeah, it probably could have been part of the planning that's like, well, all we need to do is gain access to the control center. And now that they've got the glass, it's a perfect time.
Because even if it's bulletproof, you can get a hacksaw. Right?
Right.
So it's like, we just got to get something to bust this glass.
Yeah.
And it's
if
not bars
there's
anymore.
50 of us working on it.
We got this.
Right. From the control booth, the inmates were able to retrieve weapons and riot gear to arm themselves during the attack. Soon after, they also found tools from the construction areas. They were able to use hacksaws to open various doors, and they picked up hammers, saws, blowtorches, anything they could find to use as weapons. From the maintenance and construction areas, the inmates also found glue and other chemicals that were taken for huffing. And a lot of people, when you read about this riot, talk about how huge a role drugs and being drunk or high played in escalating violence. And, you know, it was definitely a huge factor in people being incapacitated and whatnot. After the control booth was taken over, half of the prisoners used stolen keys to free dangerous inmates housed in cell block 3, and then used blowtorches to gain access to cell block 4. From the control booth, another group of prisoners were able to gain entry to the offices that were next door. And since they really had no idea how long it would be before authorities came in and ended the riot, they made it a priority to destroy as many prison records as possible before the authorities could get things back under control.
It's not a bad idea.
Right. So, of course, you know, within minutes of breaking through the control center, the prisoners were burning all the paper that they could find.
I don't know. Somebody lit a match.
Right. Like, we don't know what happened.
One cabinet after the next.
And yeah, since it's 1980, all they had was paper records at this time. None of this was computerized or automated or anything. So destroying all this paperwork, from court documents to police records, disciplinary records, psych evals, everything they could, would just completely cause chaos in the aftermath of the riot. It would be almost impossible to kind of put the puzzle pieces back together without records.
It's pretty good thinking.
It is really smart, you know, and especially if you're an inmate that has a pretty bad record.
3-inch file.
Right. Like, there's a reason why you would make that a priority.
It's kindling.
Soon after this, inmates took over the infirmary that was now empty because of the phone call, since staff and injured inmates were able to flee to safety. So the prisoners raided all the medication and immediately began getting high.
When in Rome. I mean, you're already, like, you're in prison.
Right.
Go to town.
You don't know how long it's going to be.
I don't know how long.
Until the riot's over.
Mayhem.
I'm going to get high.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, people always talk about how the amount of drugs and huffing and drinking and really caused a lowering of inhibitions that made it more possible for people to do really horrific things to fellow inmates and guards, because they were drunk and high and just didn't really have their wits about them. Many inmates overdosed during the riot, and many have speculated that access to drugs contributed to further violence or fueled how violent the riot became. It took only 15 minutes for over 500 prisoners to be let out of their cells and cause complete mayhem in the facility.
This is the episode of Lockup that I want to see. This is what I want to see.
No.
You know how many episodes of that show I sat there? It's just, okay, so yeah, he's going to the infirmary. Oh, he's going to school. Okay, they're going to lock this door behind him and then bring him through the next door and then lock that one behind him. No, this is what I want to see.
It's really crazy how quick that happened.
Can you imagine the footage? I mean, I doubt there was any, right? No camera. They don't even have working toilets. They don't have cameras here.
Yeah, I don't know.
I can't even imagine how wild the footage from this would have been.
Yeah, it's really scary, the amount of people that were just let. Even so, when I get scared of crowds just in general. So the idea of being with 500 people in pretty small, close quarters, even if they weren't inmates, sounds really terrifying to me.
Yeah.
But then you add in this fact that there's been, as we've talked about on the last episode, years of tension brewing between corrections officers and the inmates, as well as the leadership staff calling the shots. Of course, there's going to be a ridiculous amount of violence. So these 500 people are definitely on the hunt to find the people that have been victimizing them. At this time, within the early, first half hour of the riot, the prisoners were unable to get into dorm D and E1. Elsewhere in the prison, inmates were freeing each other with stolen keys and tools. And when they were kind of letting other people out of their cells, they were also making agreements between prisoners to focus their aggression on staff and the facility and kind of have this temporary truce between different cliques and racial groups and people that were normally fighting with each other.
Of course they do. Eye on the prize.
And, that wouldn't last long. Of course, it disintegrates pretty quickly where people are just attacking each other. But it was this thing that was happening. Like, you open a cell and you're like, you're going to be cool, right? You're going to leave my friends alone. And then they would let them out. And that happened within minutes. So like within 15 minutes, 500 people from different groups that have been fighting forever are now
very shaky alliances.
Right.
It's like Big Brother Survivor stuff. And you're just like, hey, we're going to go Final Four? Okay, cool. I'm going to trust you.
Next episode is completely different.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Right. Corrections officers Juan Bustos, Victor Gallegos, and Elton Curie were found and attacked next. They were brought back to the cell block E2 where the beatings and torture continued. And this kind of served as a hub in the early minutes where it's E2 was where the whole riot started. So they kind of kept the hostages in E2 and then kept bringing additional guards and patrol people and COs back here to where they held the hostages. The attacks were especially brutal for any of the COs who were especially strict or sadistic towards inmates. And we talked about in last episodes that there was definitely a lot of COs. There were, good people just trying to do their job, but there was a lot of turnover and a lot of bad apples that were really trying to psychologically terrorize inmates and get into their head and cause them a lot of pain and suffering. So the ones that were doing those kind of behaviors were very clearly targeted more heavily and treated more cruelly than other COs. 3 other guards, Larry Mendoza, Edward Ortega, and Ramon Gutierrez, were attempting to evade the mob by seeking refuge in the basement. When the prisoners found them there, they demanded to be let in, but the officers kept refusing. So the prisoners brought a hostage from the staff named Greg Roybal and proceeded to torture him in front of the COs behind the gate and saying that they would kill him if they didn't open the door. The COs that were safe behind the gate refused to open it despite watching their coworker be tortured in front of them. But after a few minutes, other inmates brought the keys and all the guards were taken hostage.
Nightmare.
I can't imagine watching that happen.
No, not at all.
And, there is this sort of like military police aspect. Like so many of the people that serve in these sort of positions have this huge team mentality of like, I've got your back, no man left behind, right? So to watch your coworker, the person that you've been protecting each other and you're coming from this kind of culture that values that so highly, and now you're completely helpless behind these bars watching it happen.
Yeah, you're brothers in arms and you're supposed to protect each other and all this. And it's like, no, I don't want to watch a stranger.
No.
Let alone somebody I know. That's terrible.
Right. I can't imagine. In another area of the prison, a group of inmates had gained access to the kitchen where they were able to retrieve knives and other items that they could arm themselves with. An inmate named Joe Madrid was outside the E1 dorm when he saw people trying to get out of a window to escape the violence. And they were really just trying to get to safety. So he felt sympathetic towards them and he handed them a pipe wrench to help them out. But moments later, he was stabbed to death by fellow inmates. It was seen kind of as a betrayal, where if he was helping anyone else, then he was on the wrong side. So they treated him especially cruelly. They hung his corpse from a basketball hoop, and then inmates proceeded to mutilate his dead body throughout the remainder of the riot.
Jeez.
And you would see this again and again. I mean, there were certain fights happening between cliques or individuals, but once someone was dead, they would continue to mutilate a person that was dead. Back in the solitary confinement unit, the inmates were opening the cells and freeing some of the most dangerous people in the prison. One of the people in this wing was Juan Sanchez. Moments after his cell door was opened, fellow inmates put a tear gas gun against his head and shot him. The force of the tear gas canister killed him instantly. Just a few cells over from this, a one-armed biker who had declined being recruited by the Aryan Brotherhood was attacked by 3 of these Aryan assholes.
This is just revenge on every level. Anything anybody's ever done, we're getting retribution today.
Right. So they tried to really crudely amputate his other arm, the only remaining arm he had, and even left hatchet marks in the concrete from the attack. Luckily, he was actually able to wiggle free, and he narrowly escaped because he fled into the crowd away from the Aryans, and it was so chaotic that they weren't able to catch him. It was extremely lucky.
With no arms.
Right.
No.
Well, he still has one, but it was severely, almost completely.
Hanging off.
Yes.
Got it.
Sorry.
It's fine. I'm just seeing who's got arms.
The mob of inmates was also able to gain access to cell block 4 by this point, which housed the inmates that were labeled as snitches, which we talked about earlier. So either rightfully or as a manipulation, the prison staff would often label people as a snitch as a way to kind of torture them, right?
They're all in one place.
Mm-hmm. So now all these people are free and they all have targets on their back. Some of them had given up information and others were really just there because the COs decided that they wanted to hurt them. The mob of inmates were particularly brutal to the cell block 4 snitches who were beaten, they were bludgeoned, they were stabbed, and even burned and sexually assaulted. And in this cell block is where you saw some of the most severe injuries. There was a prisoner who was decapitated with a shovel. There was one inmate that had his genitals removed. And a third one had a blowtorch that was shoved into his head that then exploded.
So many just things that you don't even see, like a Quentin Tarantino movie. Beheading people with shovels.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the most extreme, brutal, cruel punishment and torture.
They've had so much time to get angry too.
Yeah.
And it's just revenge. That's all this is just, wow.
And it's so tragic and sad that it's revenge, but it's revenge for things that a lot of these people didn't even do. You know, these are people that were targeted by the staff, that were labeled snitches wrongfully and didn't even do anything, you know, to deserve this. They were just put in this cell block and now all of a sudden they've received the most brutal treatment in this riot. So the group of Aryan brothers approached another inmate and told him that they would kill him unless he murdered a black inmate named Paulina Paul. So this inmate, of course, fearing for his own life, had to comply and he stabbed him. And then the Aryans jumped in and beheaded Paul with an axe. In total, 17 inmates from cell block 3 and 4 were murdered, of which 12 were tortured with blowtorches before their death. This episode is just so rough because we see these things as individual incidents in many of the other cases that we talk about, but this was so concentrated, so many horrific things happening at one time. And now I just feel like I'm listing off just completely horror movie torture stuff.
It starts to sound awful. like just, you know, arbitrary because you just list so many things. But then when you think about it in the sense of like, I'm a person in that setting and you're just running and there's probably no lights on and it's just the smell of blood probably and sweat inside. It's hot, no ventilation. It's cold again though. It's winter. But we're running through and there's just people on the ground. I almost imagine, like I envision what you see in these footage from mass shootings where there's just people, just bodies, and they're just like trying to find a way out quickly and just getting stopped by people and they're beheading you and killing you with shovels and crazy things that I just, the reality of what's going on, they had no idea.
Yeah. Just the chaos and the desperation to get to safety. And everyone's trying to protect themselves. But then you don't know if you're putting yourself in danger because you don't know if the next cell block over is worse than the one you're in, you know? And you don't know if you hand someone a wrench, if someone's going to come after you for that. You have no idea. Like, it's just such a horror movie to think of being in this facility at this time.
A horror movie for sure.
The amount of trauma and PTSD that all of these people must have.
Rob Zombie did a version of this. Oh my God. Could you imagine? Jesus.
Yeah, that's the thing, is it just seems unreal, the amount of concentrated violence happening to so many people at the exact same time. It just seems like fiction. It's so bad. So while the violence was peaking inside, the police clearly didn't understand how severe the situation was in the facility. So they sent a couple patrol cars to sit outside, and basically it seems like they were just watching for escaping prisoners. The cops, I think, must have thought that the staff inside could just gain control back, because they didn't increase their effort until well into the next day. It was just basic patrol outside.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they were really trying to do anything to go in and help. And I understand that going in is a danger to your officers, but I think that they could have at some point been really quick. If this was treated like a normal 911 call where we have to get there within 5 minutes, they could have only been dealing with 2 cell blocks. Instead of, like we talked about earlier, 15 minutes and then 500 people are loose. So the lack of response and additional law enforcement to help out really, I think, allowed this to spread faster and be less easily contained in the long run. So SWAT and National Guard arrived in the afternoon the next day, but they only kept watch outside instead of attempting to go in and help and contain the issue. On the outside, Deputy Warden Robert Montoya and Deputy Secretary of Corrections Felix Rodriguez attempted to negotiate with an inmate nicknamed Chopper One. And Chopper One was the person that emerged as the spokesperson for the inmates during the entire riot.
Chopper One sounds like a bar.
Right?
Something like that. Biker bar.
Although Chopper really spoke for the group at large, there was no actual organization or leadership during the whole ordeal. So inmates were just, off in separate groups, causing destruction, inflicting violence at random throughout the facility with no overall goals or leadership or anything.
They're very unorganized.
Yeah, and it's just, as we saw in last episode, there was a point where they were trying to organize, where they had a work strike that was, 70% of the prison participated in. And I think this speaks to the fact that there was additional desperation. We saw that the nonviolent route didn't work, So they're thinking, well, the only thing that works is being violent.
Look what you made me do. Right? The
Yeah.
strike didn't work. We tried to do this through nonviolence. We've been complaining. We've said it. We've done this. Blah, 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 blah. Chain of command. Got it. You replaced our warden 4 fucking times. So nothing's going to happen. This is it. Now I need blowtorch and hacksaws. I'm coming for you.
I can understand how the inmates felt like they were backed into a corner where they had to make a violent attack, and it's so sad and so unfortunate. And what I always come back to is the people on the front lines, the corrections officers and guards, they're not the leadership team making the decisions. They're not the one handing down the orders. They're just following direction. And they're the ones that end up suffering the most. You know, they're the ones that are targeted with the most brutality and violence because their supervisors and all the higher ups had just backed them into a corner too, where they had to, you know, treat the inmates like animals, you know? And like I said before, I think that some of them were probably coming into it with a lack of ethics, and some of them were hardworking people trying to do the best they could, but they were the ones that suffered the most. It's just so sad because the people giving the orders aren't the ones that are going to have to pay the consequences. So at first, when the negotiations started, Chopper requested that the deputy warden turn himself over to the rioters in exchange for release of the corrections officer hostages. After some back and forth negotiating, Chopper agreed to let some of the injured inmates come out to the courtyard to get medical attention, but he wouldn't release any hostages. They were just going back and forth and not getting anywhere. Throughout the rest...
Get to Old Navy this Saturday. One day only. Cozy tees for women and kids and thermals for men and boys are on sale. Just $8 for adults, $6 for kids. Don't miss out. Hurry in Saturday to Old Navy and OldNavy.com. Valid 11/2, select styles only.
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Of the time that they were rioting, the wounded inmates would continue to pour into the courtyard, and many others who were not injured would escape to seek refuge in this area.
Rather be outside, quite frankly. It smells like shit inside, right? And now I got a stab wound.
Yeah. So, I mean, initially it was like, yeah, the injured are coming out, but once they see that it's safer outside, but then the thing is, you're thinking, okay, all the violence is happening inside, but people are one by one escaping outside. At what point does the percentage of people get higher outside than inside? And then all the people that were violent inside the facility are now contained in the same courtyard area.
I'll figure it out when we get there. Right now, I'm outside.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Shit.
like
this
it's
is minute
true.
by minute.
You can't think it that far ahead, but really that's, you know, what you have to see in the future is going to happen. At some point, it's going to be taken over by violence just the same way the inside was. So as people were coming out, officers were attempting to interview them and get some information. But most of these people coming to the courtyard were too injured to really communicate what was going on, or really too high on stolen meds to provide reliable information. The percentage of people that actually could understand what was going on and articulate what happened in the facility was very low. The group outside would grow over the next several hours, and eventually there were hundreds of men in the courtyard. The negotiating would continue on through the afternoon and then into the early evening, with rioters eventually introducing an official list of demands.
Yeah, see, if we're going to do this, if we're going to riot, like, get your list together. Guys, come on. We just needed a little more organization.
But everything is so separate. You've got so many other little mobs running through the prison now.
I'm not really defending this, by the way. Like, you just totally... But everything's so... No, I got you. But like...
No, I hear what you're saying.
We're beheading people with shovels. We got demands, okay? We got Chopper 1 over here. He's going to talk to everybody. So we need to get our ducks in a row, right? Nope. We're over here getting fucked up on stolen meds. Like, those are the guys to be following. Are the ones that are just nodding out. You just need to go with that. Nobody's going to attack some freaking, dilaudid out motherfucker on the ground. You're going to run past him. So just fake an overdose.
Yeah, I would probably be playing possum if I was in there for sure.
Possum me up all the way. Because I know I can't fight to the death. Tear gas can to my head. Done. Okay? Neck is small. All these things. OD on the ground. That was me. I was ODing over there.
Yeah, I just think Chopper 1 had this really difficult job of communicating with the outside. Probably he, I would assume, had a list of complaints and demands pretty early on. But the thing is, the other thing that I didn't really talk too much about was there were other groups of people, right? Some of these people were actively trying to sabotage the efforts to negotiate. So I just don't think that I covered it in here, although I should have, but I was like cutting for time. There were plenty of people that were interfering with walkie-talkie communication. So, Chopper's on this walkie trying to talk to the warden outside. Then there's people coming in trying to interrupt it. It was really difficult to try and get some common ground and even go back and forth and negotiate things.
So Chopper is an extremely exasperated and frustrated operations manager. Basically.
Pretty much.
Everyone's coming to him. This is what we got to do. And then these guys are fucking up, not turning in their receipts, whatever it is. Chopper's got to fix it. He's got to go talk to everybody. He's probably just through the roof. Poor Chopper.
Yeah, he's trying to do the best he could with the situation and bring it to an end.
But you got to have your paperwork ready.
So most of the things that they were asking for in this list of demands weren't really possible to instantly be granted. These are much bigger issues of long-term, conditions that we talked about last episode.
This isn't just changing a light bulb, you mean? Give us lights in E2.
Yeah. I mean, both sides were holding their ground because of these long-term things where, again, the trust was broken down. If I say, hey, I need the toilets fixed, there's no proof that they're actually going to do that. So it was hard for them to kind of find some negotiation common ground in there. A lot of the inmates were especially concerned that they would accrue extra charges stemming from what happened in the riot. So one of the things that they were requesting was to not be charged with additional crimes, not have additional time to serve. Of course, they also wanted to improve conditions, reduce overcrowding, a lot of the things we talked about last time about cleanliness and food, water access, all that stuff. But the immediate things that the outside law enforcement could deliver on was access to the media, along with extra gas masks and additional walkie-talkies. In exchange, law enforcement demanded that more wounded inmates be brought out to the courtyard, and firefighters should be allowed access to extinguish flames that were raging inside. Of course, we know that they had blowtorches. They're using them against each other. So there was a lot of fires inside. One of the things people talk about is the smell of fire, the smell of burning bodies. It was horrific. But when the firefighters arrived, inmates actually punctured their hoses, which ruined any effort to put out the fires. The inmates released 3 hostages in exchange for direct contact with the media.
Everybody wants to be on TV.
That's what it comes down to.
I
just being
swear
famous.
to God, right? The place is on fire. We want to talk to the reporter.
Well, I think,
I get it, but I'm just staring at you.
I understand that about humanity of everybody needs their 5 seconds of fame. But when it comes down to this group of inmates, I don't necessarily feel like that was a factor. To me, it's just the fact that they've had no voice. They've had no ability to be heard or seen. They've tried to organize the work strike and that didn't work. Nobody's listening to them. There's also, like I said, a lawsuit going on that was just filed by 2 inmates talking about these ridiculously inhumane conditions that they were enduring. But none of that is really gaining them any traction. So I think, it makes a lot of sense that they're like, look, we just need to tell people in the general public what we're living through. The fact that they gave us all food poisoning on Thanksgiving and then didn't flush our toilets for days. People need to know that we're infested with rats and cockroaches. People need to know that there's 4 of us sleeping in a 1-person cell on the ground with no blankets or pillows. I think they just wanted to be heard. They wanted that known.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully the person watching the news report is the person that actually has a bleeding heart and feels bad, because most of these people are like, they're in prison for a reason. It should suck. It should be fucking miserable. I don't care if you can't shit in a toilet for days. I hope it sucks. Don't do it again. So it's very like, I completely understand why they want to talk to the media. I was just being an asshole. But but I mean, it's almost, I hope what you're saying, though, gets to the right audience.
Yeah, that's the thing.
This is a different time, too.
There's no guarantee that the person that's watching the news is going to be like a lawyer, a high-powered lawyer that's able to fight for them, or a legislator that's able to change things. They have no guarantee of that. But I can understand the desperation of being like, but at least if I get it out there, it might reach someone that could do something. Because right now, that's not happening at all. I have no way of listing all these things that are wrong with the prison. Nobody knows what's going on. So I get why the media is really important to these inmates, But it's extremely scary, the idea that there's this chaos and murder and violence going on inside, and you're going to send an additional person in there that could be a target. But there was one brave NBC cameraman named Michael Shagru who volunteered to enter the facility and film whatever the inmates had to say. And I can't imagine what it would be like for him to just raise his hand and be like, yeah, I'll do it. That is taking your life into your hands. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. So Michael went inside to film them for 40 minutes, and he recorded inmates who hid their faces with torn bed sheets and clothes and put them around their heads like bandanas, and listed off all the things that were going wrong behind the gates of this facility. When the cameraman made it back outside, the footage was watched by law enforcement, but never released publicly.
So I'll take that as a challenge because it's out there somewhere. There's
right.
No
yeah.
way.
Someone has a copy of it.
I'll find it.
But at the same time, it's just once again that these inmates are being let down. And I'm not condoning the riot. Obviously, getting these things by means of violence, it's just so sad that they were pushed into this corner. And then so many people were injured and lost their lives because of this. But then to not play the footage and not give them a voice, you're really solidifying what they already felt. That you treat them like animals. You don't value the kind of inhumane conditions that they're living in. You don't care. And that really gives weight to what they think is going on. It makes it true.
Yeah, I don't think anybody cared about that, how they feel about it. Look what they've done. I don't think anybody cared.
Michael would later talk about regretting his decision to enter the prison. And he really had trouble moving on from the horrors that he had seen in there. It had been at this point almost a full 24 hours, and there was no end in sight. An entire day had passed, and no negotiation terms were agreed upon. No headway was made. The next morning, one hostage named Victor Gallegos escaped with help from a few sympathetic inmates. And he informed the negotiators that his colleague, Greg Roybal, had actually suffered a heart attack and needed urgent medical attention. So during the time that they were torturing all these guards, this one CO had a heart attack. It was awful. Of course, I can't imagine just how taxing that would be on your mind and body.
Now, Roybal is the one that they were torturing. They were holding the gate and they were saying, no, if you don't, we're going to, whatever. So I would bet it's just the stress of everything going on. And then,
exactly.
Watching all this go on. And then, oh my God, I just can't. Now I'm having a heart attack.
Yeah, he was the pawn.
That's crazy that all that happened to him.
To gain access to the basement. He was the one where there were 3 guards behind the gate. And they brought Roybal there and tortured him in front of them and said, if you don't open the gate, I'm going to kill him. So he thought he was going to die. Of course he had a heart attack. I mean, that's a horrific mental torture to think that you're not going to survive. So negotiators from both sides were able to agree upon the fact that it was best to bring him out so he could be taken to a hospital. By this point, the group of inmates in the courtyard had grown to almost 1,000 people. And although it had started out as an escape from the violence inside, like I said before, tensions were beginning to rise outside with this group of people. The courtyard was visible and had the National Guard kind of patrolling the perimeter of it, but they couldn't really keep things calm forever. There was nothing they could do.
They're just watching from outside. It's a fishbowl.
Exactly.
Just watching the fish swim around and fight once in a while.
Completely. I mean, there was no action that they could take to protect anybody in there.
They can like point through a chain link and go, hey, stop that.
Yeah, no. Like,
Stop
who
doing
listens to that?
Yeah, exactly.
A fight broke out in the courtyard between Hispanic and Black inmates, but fortunately, they were able to actually get things under control. And I think additional inmates just kind of stepped in and put an end to it. Another round of negotiations began in the afternoon, which was covered by reporters. A few remaining inmate leaders requested changes to prison procedures and transfers to different facilities, but there were still another 100 inmates inside that were prepared to just continue holding out and even die fighting. They were kind of not really caring what happened to them. It became clear at this point that authorities would actually have to send in SWAT team to take back the prison by force. Fortunately, no lives were actually lost while regaining control, and they were able to take over the facility using non-lethal tactics like tear gas canisters and pepper spray.
It's pretty impressive.
I am really surprised.
Yeah.
I know that these tactics exist and they're trained to use them, but for some reason, the way that the previous 36 hours had gone down, I just felt like there must be some sort of death involved in gaining control back, you know?
While you're listening to this, it's like, that's not what you're expecting.
No.
You're expecting it to burn to the ground and there's just death and destruction.
Everything
there
that's
is,
happened
but-
before is...
Exactly.
Yeah. The violent inmates who had boasted about what they would do to law enforcement who tried to take back the prison actually ended up putting very little resistance against the SWAT team. By the end of the 36-hour riot, there were about 200 inmates who were injured. 100 people had to be hospitalized for injuries sustained during assault or rape, and an additional 90 people that were treated for overdoses.
That would be me pretending. I'd be the 91st person and then I'd be like, wait, I'm good. Never mind. Oh, wait, I'm fine. I'm totally good. Never mind. I was just asleep here at the time. And that's how you live. Yeah. Right? You just fake the OD. For 36 hours, I could do that. You know what I mean? Like I could just pretend to sleep for sure.
It's just one of the things that's crazy to me. I mean, we're talking about 400 people, and there's a little bit less than 1,200 prisoners that were in the facility when the riot broke out. So you're talking about, a third of the population was injured in this attack. I mean, that's terrible. That's just so many people. So many.
It's a lot of medical treatment.
Exactly. So the influx of patients was way too much for the local hospitals. So a lot of these inmates were transferred to surrounding medical facilities because they just didn't have the capacity to help them. The family members of the inmates were not notified about the status of their loved ones for several weeks.
That's insane.
Not days, weeks. All of the incoming or outgoing mail was halted in the aftermath of the riot, so families were left just waiting and not knowing if their loved ones were even alive. So this was partially because they were having trouble actually identifying the bodies. They had no medical records. They didn't know what, no pictures to compare it to. And a lot of these, the bodies were just so badly damaged that they couldn't identify them. So part of me understands why it's happening. The other part of me is just heartbroken for these families and inmates that were completely cut off from each other and had no way of knowing what had happened to their loved one.
Of course. And I'm sure, you're hearing about it on the news and just knowing that someone inside and they're just telling you how terrible it is. And you just have to wait to hear if they're missing or if they've been found.
Right. Awful. The medical examiner needed help identifying bodies that were really badly burned or disfigured, so he sought assistance from anthropologists and dentists. The anthropologists were tasked with finding and identifying bones in some of the buried wreckage, but they were only able to identify 3 additional victims.
That is so few. That's just kind of shocking.
It is. It gets worse. Trust me.
Good.
It's just crazy. I can't even believe it just doesn't seem real. So much of this just doesn't seem real. So the surviving prisoners would be left outside in the gated courtyard area for days to come, which led, of course, to further violence and more sexual assaults. Even if an inmate was able to actually avoid violence, they still endured icy cold temperatures at night and had minimal access to food and water.
And again, it's like I can just hear people like, well, they're in prison. That's what prison's about. They made the riot. They got to live with it.
It just,
you know what I mean?
That kind of argument, I know it drives me absolutely crazy. I totally hear you. Like I can hear people saying that in the background of my head. Like I can't believe people would really, truly feel like it's okay to treat other human beings like animals, you know? It's just unbelievable to me. But that's what the staff was doing. That's what, the leadership team and legislators were allowing to happen. And then this happened. It's crazy. So on February 4th, 1980, an additional 15 inmates had to be hospitalized for injuries from stabbings, beatings, and sexual assault. The National Guard cleaned up one cell block at a time, and then just slowly moved inmates back into each dorm as each one became ready. The prisoners moving back soon discovered that they were still facing the same inhumane conditions and harsh treatment. Nothing had changed or gotten better. If anything, it kind of got worse. Because the cleanup team needed to work really quickly to get all these inmates back into their cells as soon as possible, there was really no way to preserve any of the numerous crime scenes, and there was tons of forensic evidence that was just lost.
This is just a wash. Like there's just too much. Just throw them back in as we clean them up, figure it out. A lot of these people are getting away with murder today, guys, but just throw them back in the room.
That's the thing. I mean, and I understand all they can do is if you keep the people in the courtyard, then it's going to get worse. We're seeing more people go to the hospital. So you have to work as quickly as possible, and you're losing all this forensics and information, but it's an absolute necessity to continue to maintain the safety of the people outside. You have to do it. But now you're completely jeopardizing any sort of consequences for the inmates who did just murder someone. And that's just crazy to me. It's so sad. And then you don't have any closure for the families and the victims.
None.
It's heartbreaking. Many of the people on the cleanup crew were severely affected by what they encountered in the prison. The National Guard members were traumatized by mutilated bodies, excessive amounts of blood, and the smell of burning flesh that was inside the facility. As dorms were cleaned and inmates were brought back inside, many of the most violent inmates from the riot were returned to Gen Pop, and just tensions were at an all-time high following the incident. Again, there's no records. There's no way of knowing who was in solitary, who had, a long list of disciplinary issues, which prisoners were the violent ones. So everybody was just arbitrarily returned to cells.
All the correction officers that know anything are dead or in the hospital. There's no paperwork. And again, all these employees are new all the time. There's turnovers crazy. So you just believe what this guy's going to tell you. Inmate 402, where were you? Gen Pop. Cool. Go back to Gen Pop.
Right.
He was in the hole for the last 6 years straight for just being such a psychopath, right? No, we just got to trust him now. It'll work itself out, Brianna. That's the thing is like, I hate to say this, but eventually they're going to figure it out, right? It's going to be the form of prison justice, but you have no paperwork.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, when they were bringing them back into the cells, it seemed like they were treating them like numbers, you know? It was
Absolutely.
just no names whatsoever. So here's, the immediate 100 people that are standing closest to me are the people that go into the next cleaned up cell block, because we just have to get you back in. We have to get this contained. We have to get you to not be outside where there's no food and water, no blankets, no pillows, no nothing, and you're freezing cold. So it's just another thing that was a necessity to get them back in the facility, but then it leaves it open for so much more tension and violence. You can't keep certain groups and cliques apart. You can't keep certain inmates separate and safe, It's just a necessity, but a dangerous one. In the next few weeks, many inmates were transferred to other facilities, and about 400 were even sent out of state to Arizona, Georgia, Kansas, and Oklahoma. 10 prisoners who were sent to Arizona were actually returned to New Mexico because officials had falsified records to label them as snitches who needed to be in protective custody in order to ensure that they could get transferred. So they were actively making up records to make it seem like it was a priority for them to get to another facility.
That's wild.
Right?
And that's just what we know of from this.
Yeah, I'm sure that's many more that we just don't know of. On March 8th, over a month after the riot, the governor finally announced that there had been 33 casualties and the families were notified of these 33 victims. It was never really discussed publicly that there were still 20 inmates unaccounted for, and paperwork issues had led to many inmates being lost, paroled early, or transferred without records. It was complete chaos.
I mean, some of these people just lucky stay of your life.
Yeah, right?
Number one, you made it through the prison when you were there. 2, you lived through the riot. 3, you got early release.
Yeah,
right?
It's crazy that would happen.
And that there's still, technically, like right now, there are people unaccounted for.
Mm-hmm.
And I would bet some of them are no longer with us.
Correct.
Some of them have new names and are living in Kansas. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you just stay, you keep your head above water. You never do anything wrong again.
There's at least one person out there in Kansas thanking their lucky stars and just
leading the straight and narrow life.
Yeah.
Probably just like went into banking and just boring for the rest of their lives. He got a lot of excitement. Doesn't need any more, right?
I can't even
I would
imagine.
learn my lesson. Maybe.
Probably not.
Probably not.
In the aftermath, officials were quick to point the finger at inmates that they labeled as, quote, a new breed of violent inmates that they felt caused the riot. And to me, again, I'm going to come back to the fact that I think that this is another tactic to make it seem less human, like these people are animals. Talking about, there's reports where they talk about their genetic factors and stuff like that. This is talking about them like they're not people.
Because then it's not their fault. There was nothing they could do. These people, it's in them. They were going to react that way. It's in their genes. It's in their DNA. There was nothing we could do.
Or not just that, but just... that there's no hope for them whatsoever. That there's no possibility that they would ever get better, But just the way that they talked about them like animals is just so telling to me that it affects the way that they would treat them. And of course, these people that are treated like animals are going to lash out at you when you treat them that horrifically. It's crazy to me. But for me, the biggest rebuttal to this argument that there was this new breed, quote unquote, of violent, dangerous inmates would be the fact that the number of inmates convicted for violent crimes in the facility had steadily decreased. So in 1970, 45% of the inmate population was there for violent crimes, right? That had a history of violence. And it was all the way down to 33% at the time of the riot. So the statistics don't support the fact that they say that there were more violent inmates there, because the actual conviction records show that that's not the case. The statistics actually point out that there were less violent inmates housed in the facility at the time of the riot, which makes it clear that the violence most likely resulted from the actions of the staff and the leadership instead of the, deep down nature of these inmates. But of course, the higher ups don't want to take any responsibility, so they're making this argument that it's the inmates' fault.
Of course.
The guards threatened to strike after the riot, but the administrators were not responsive to any of their demands. Almost 60 staff members quit after the riot, including 13 who had been hostages during the whole ordeal.
Is there even a question about that? Like, yeah, you quit the job.
I can't imagine. 8 of these hostages would go on to file a lawsuit against the state. The facility refused to admit any fault for fear of having to pay out millions of dollars to these guards.
Fuck them. Seriously, that's just, oh my God, I hate people.
Yeah, it's their fault that these things happened. So many precautions were not taken. People were not listened to. The inmates were subjected to these horrible conditions. And none of these legislators or powerful people were doing anything about it. And again, like I said, the COs are some of the people that suffered the worst during this whole ordeal. Many of the guards ended up having to live off disability following the incident. Although there were 33 murders by even the most conservative estimate, there were only indictments for 13 of those murders.
That's what happens when you just clean up a crime scene and throw them back in.
Right. As we see so often with convictions, it really is important to secure evidence. I mean, they are leaving 20 murders completely unsolved.
I mean, the excuse, not excuse, but like the reason obviously is, well, it was a bloodbath. Like we couldn't tell up from down.
We're just doing the best we can.
Exactly.
We're trying to, move forward on the ones that we do have information on.
Like don't hate on what we didn't do. Like us for what we have done, which is 13.
Right.
Which is like, all right.
Yeah. But that means there's just no justice and nothing for the families of these people that were killed. So most of the inmates took plea bargains for their sentences to run concurrently with their original crimes, which means they did not serve any additional time for these murders. Only 2 of the murders went to an actual jury trial, and both were found guilty. So the majority of these murders are still technically unsolved. After the dust settled, the state of New Mexico passed a bill allocating almost $90,000 to spend on improving the prison system.
That's not enough, though.
No.
At all, because an $8 million renovation did nothing.
Right.
So $90,000 into this. That's like painting the parking lot with stripes for your parking spaces.
Yeah.
And we did the inflation, like $8 million, maybe 20 years prior or so, was $75 million. So $90K is like $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 some, stupid.
It's
some
just
under
not
10.
enough.
It's not enough.
The
That's the
huge
answer.
changes
The answer is
you
it's
need.
not enough.
So it was decided to build another prison as well as make upgrades to the existing facility, including improved riot gear and increased security. But like we saw before, the COs weren't even following basic security protocol, like closing gates and doors.
For these rules to work, they have to be implemented.
So yeah, part of that is just the staff. And again, that comes back to morale. That comes back to having good conditions for your inmates so that there isn't this tension and infighting between staff and inmates, So it doesn't really get to the root of the issue that caused the riot. It's very disappointing. Over 400 lawsuits were brought against the state and the penitentiary for their negligence and inability to ensure the inmates' safety. Only a very small percentage were able to actually win settlements. And we see this all the time too, where it does take months and years of persistence to win these kind of lawsuits. You're still putting money out of your pocket to fight them. So yes, that's a lot. 400 lawsuits is a big number, but we see this all the time. It just dwindles to barely anything by the end of it.
Yeah.
In 1998, the New Mexico State Penitentiary was closed and all the inmates were transferred to new prisons or surrounding facilities. The former penitentiary is now nicknamed, quote, Old Main, and is used as a filming location for projects like The Hunt for Bin Laden, The Longest Yard, and All the Pretty Horses.
It's the Old Main prison.
Yep.
I get it.
During filming, many members of the crew report odd, unexplainable occurrences, and they claim that the prison is haunted.
I believe them.
Yep.
I don't need to hear anything else.
But we could find out for ourselves because it's open to the public for tours where they just walk you through the events of the riot step by step.
Let's go.
So pack your bags.
We'll go visit your family and then we got to go to the Old Main, take a walking tour.
My extended family is like a half hour away from this prison. So
this is easy.
Yeah.
We
have
there.
Places to stay.
Perfect. This is a place that I would want to go. This is one of those like historical, sites that I would actually want to see.
It's so tragic and heartbreaking and just fascinating, the kind of things that happened during this riot. And again, like the reason that I'm fascinated by true crime is seeing the ways that people can prevent it, the things that can be done ahead of time, the kind of precautions that can be taken. That's what I think about in literally every case we cover. And so that's the thing that I have focused on when looking into this case, where it's like the ways that they were negligent and abusive and dropped the ball and inhumane and also just didn't pay attention, and just let things slip through the cracks. I mean, this was so easily avoidable by just some simple safety precautions and changing the general attitude towards your inmate population. But they didn't. And it just ended in horrific violence.
Yeah, it sure did. This is a bloodbath is like the term. I mean, the fact that there's still, like 20 people that they just never even identified is like pretty wild. We don't hear about that a lot in the end. And that it's okay. Like they're not not trying to exhume any bodies in 2013 or something, right? Like, and that there's families that are like, we never got a call. We never got another letter. I'm going to assume he's one of those 20. I would be like, okay, here's my DNA, familial, right? Here's my soda can for you to test that you're going to pull out of the trash anyway. Like, come on. I would care, but maybe it's also, families are weird. It might be one of those like, it's better to keep that door closed, right? We don't talk about him. That was in prison anyway, right? Who knows? People are weird.
Yeah, it's just so crazy to me. Like you said, like these people either just disappeared and the families don't know about it, or they made it to another state and were able to restart a life. And that's another thing that I find fascinating. We've talked about people that are just able to, in old-timey cases, just
one county over,
get new identities and aren't even that far away.
10 feet away.
However far that inmate could make it on foot, they just stayed there for the rest of their lives. They own a general store. They just retired.
Named after him,
right?
Tom's
Old Main General Store.
Yeah, it's Old Main General Store. It's modeled after the old prison I was in. Like, I'm sure they're not even quiet about it.
Yeah,
but also they might be like, nobody's coming to get me. That's for damn sure.
Yep.
Like, so I made it out. They closed the book. They wiped it clean. They don't even show us the footage. This is something New Mexico doesn't want to talk about. So yeah, you made it out.
Yeah, this story is just crazy to me. And, I'm not a person that gets very into unsolved cases because a lack of closure is so hard for me to process. It's like deeply painful. And this is one of those things that I just can't imagine the lack of closure that some of these families have. And the kind of, just being kept in the dark for so long, weeks after this happened. I just put myself in their shoes and it breaks my heart that they went through that. So I don't know. This one's a really rough one for me to wrap my mind around, but it's a very compelling story. And like I always say, we like to look at these subjects that we cover in our letters from different angles. And this is definitely the corruption angle. This is definitely the, being kept in terrible circumstances behind bars leads to this kind of stuff. You know?
Cause and effect.
It is.
Big time in this one.
Yep. So that's another jailhouse murder for our letter J.
We got another one coming.
Yep. One more.
One more. It'll be cool. We're going to be, this is the 2-part.
Yep.
So we got 2 weeks and then, because we can count. So 1 to 2 and then the 3rd week. Okay, cool.
Can we count?
Here I am. I don't know. Here I am. We're going to do the 3rd jailhouse murder.
Yep.
I'll get my act together.
So yeah, before we get out of here, if you want to look into this case a little bit more, there's an attorney general report that I'll put a link to in the show notes, as well as a few other articles like we always do. And there's another series by another podcast called Unresolved, where they cover it a little bit more in depth than we went into. So there's definitely some more information out there. If you want it, just check out those links.
Sounds good.
So another thing before we get out of here, if you are not on our Patreon, then I would say check it out. We've got a ton of bonus content on there, and we want to say thank you to our new people on Patreon, Dean, Jennifer, and Andrew.
Thank you.
So if you want access to some bonus episodes and see what we've got going on over there, we released a bonus recently where you could hear one of the episodes that we put on our Patreon. So if you liked that one, definitely head over to patreon.com/Murder Dictionary Podcast and check that out. Cool.
Leave us a great review.
Yeah, if you like the show, rate, review, and subscribe. We always appreciate that. Tell your friends and family about us if you think that they would enjoy the show. And follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
That's about it.
Court's on there with breaking news all the time.
I love groups. I'm in a group big time. Like everything I'm
into. You just watched a sniper breaking news for like 8 hours and broke your entire computer. That's how dedicated to breaking news Courtney is.
I had to get a new computer this week because I watched a sniper video, like you were just saying, for about 4 to 5 hours. And it never turned on again after that. Even the girl at Apple was like, this is impressive. People watch Netflix for days at a time. I was like, I don't think you understand the level I'm at. But
you had to see what was going on with the sniper. You had to keep up to date.
And then it was a hoax, the son of a bitch. It was a new deputy. He had already had issues with honesty. He shot himself, and it was a hoax. And he cut a hole in his shoulder in his uniform and said he had been shot. There was this whole thing. Somebody shot him from the apartment across the street. Standoff. Hours and hours and hours of standoff. The mayor says, yeah, I went to the hospital and I visited him in the hospital. He's real brave. Oh, he's doing great. He's got a shot wound in his shoulder, but he's going to be just fine. How do you come back from that, Mayor Rex Paris? Get your town together. He's the one that built the apartments and the mental institution. The mental facility next door to the police station. And then he goes on camera and says, I don't understand who approved this. Why would you have a mental facility next door to a police station? It's like, count back 5 years ago. You're the one that approved this goddamn public works. God damn it, I hate this guy. Anyway, that was Lancaster, California.
Courtney is standing behind a whiteboard right now. It wasn't in the room 30 seconds ago and it just appeared. You're connecting the dots.
Yeah. Just graphics everywhere. Lines.
Conspiracy Court, here to play.
This was no conspiracy. The son of a bitch, it was fake.
I know.
Hoax. And I broke my computer over a hoax. Wasn't even real. How many times have I messaged you too? By the way, got a chase, got a this, something's live.
Yeah, Court sends me active chases constantly, so I could just click on a link and watch it.
We're in LA.
I have watched chases at work and put my phone in front of my computer just so I could watch it while I'm working because of you. You've got me hooked.
iPad, laptop, and phone. Because
multi-screen
Stu Mundell's reporting is much better than the Channel 5 girl. So I like Stu Mundell. We follow him on Twitter. We follow him on everything. Greatest helicopter reporting pilot out there. Hey, Stu, what's up?
So clearly, through the last couple minutes, you can tell Court always knows what's up with breaking news.
A little bit.
It's just every time something happens in the world, I just need to hit you up and be like, okay, give me the Cliff's Notes of what just happened. So if you want that, the little short Cliff Notes or the best article, that will be on our social media because Court is on top of it.
The best is when I don't know because you'll be like, hey, did you hear? And I'm just like, I immediately throw everything on the ground and I just put my hands on the table and go, okay, tell me everything. Go. Give it to me. I need it right now. It's like an illness.
Right. You have to have all the information.
So give it to me, people. Give it to me all in the groups. I love it.
All right. Definitely check that out. And if you have stuff to contribute, once in a blue moon, Court doesn't know what's going on.
It's
so
true.
definitely feel free to share
On
that
occasion.
on our groups and pages.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sounds
So
great.
in the meantime, check that out. And then we will see you next week.
Yeah.
With another last jailhouse murder for letter J.
It's a good one.
Cool. You guys have a good week and we'll see you next time.
Be safe.
Bye.
Bye.
We all have songs that remind us of our first love and bands that make us think of a certain friend. Maybe you have a workout playlist or a favorite album to listen to on road trips. But do you ever wonder what was going on in the lives of the artist when they wrote the music that you connect to your own memories? Rockumentary Podcast fills in the blanks on what you may not know about the iconic artists making the music that's so meaningful to our own lives. Each episode is an in-depth biography spanning from a musician's childhood through all the challenges of their journey to success and how they handled finally achieving fame. On Rockumentary, you'll hear about Kurt Cobain becoming a janitor at the same high school that he dropped out of, or how Jimi Hendrix was kidnapped and held for ransom for 2 days. Our episodes include details about Notorious B.I.G. marrying Faith Evans after knowing her for only a week, and Phil Spector pulling a gun on the Ramones when they tried to end a long recording session. You may know the music, but on Rockumentary, you'll hear the stories behind the songs. Search for Rockumentary on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you like to listen to podcasts.
Let's say you just bought a house. Bad news is, you're one step closer to becoming your parents. You'll proudly mow the lawn, ask if anybody noticed you mowed the lawn, tell people to stay off the lawn, compare it to your neighbor's lawn, and complain about having to mow the lawn again. Good news is, it's easy to bundle home and auto through Progressive and save on your car insurance, which, of course, will go right into the lawn. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company, affiliates, and other insurers. Discount not available in all states or situations.